Good morning, everyone. Good morning, students. This is Divya Banu, and I have completed my MSc in Andhra University. Today, we are going to study about the lesson cell. Cell structure and functions of the cell. Before going to the cell lesson, we'll go to discuss about the brief history and what is about the cell. Actually, where the cells come from. What is a cell? The cell is a structural and functional unit of all living beings. Cell is the fundamental structural and functional unit of all living beings. It is the basic structure which an organism is made up of. All living things are made up of one or more cells. If we are going to study about the organism, that may be unicellular or multicellular organism, the basic unit and the basic structure of the organism is a cell. Every cell has its own life because it contains the living material, either it contains DNA or it contains RNA. All organisms, including ourselves, start life as a single cell called the zygote. Zygote is the single cell which is formed from the male gamete, that is sperm of the from father side, and the female gamete ova from the mother side. Both get fused to form the single cell, that is zygote. Zygote is a single cell which our life begins. Cells are the so Cells are so small, microscopic, that we cannot see with our naked eye. That they cannot be seen with the naked eye. They can be seen with only with the help of microscope. Here one question comes. In olden days, before we have the knowledge of the cell, how can we know the cell come from? That we are going to discuss about the brief discovery of the cell. Before the knowledge of the cell, Robert Hooke, an English scientist, discovered the compound microscope, observed thin slice of cork, and there appear small room-like structures named as cells. This before the knowledge that our organism is made up of cell, Robert Hooke, a scientist, discovered the compound microscope by using two lenses, and he observed the thin slices of the oak tree, the bark of the oak tree, and he observed small room-like structures and named them as cells. In Latin, the cells or cella is called as a room. He observed small rooms on the slices of the cell and named them as cells. He observed the dead cells, that is bark of the oak tree. But the living cell was discovered by Antony von Leeuwenhoek. Leeuwenhoek observed the living cells from the wastage of the mouth and tongue and named them as animalcules. Because they are very tiny in structure, named them as animalcules by Anton von Leeuwenhoek. And then comes about the cell theory. What is the cell theory? Before the knowledge of the cell, Anton von Leeuwenhoek and Robert Hooke discovered the cell, and it is nowadays we know about the cell as a structural and basic unit of life. But the two scientists, that is Sheldon and Scaven, after the discovery of the cell, studied more about detailed structure of the cell and proposed the theory that is called cell theory. All organisms are composed of one or more cells. All living organisms are composed of one or more cells, either prokaryotic cell or eukaryotic cell. Living cells are made up of one single cell or more cells. Single cell, if the organism contain only one cell, then it is called unicellular organism. If the organisms contain two or more cells, then the organisms called as multicellular organism. In the cell theory, the first point given by Sheldon and Scaven is all organisms are composed of one or more cells. And the next point is cell is the basic unit of life in all living things. In all living things, cell is the basic unit of life because all the functions performed by the body depends on the functions performed by the cell. So we can say that cell is the basic unit of life in all living things. And after the given theory of the Sheldon and Scaven, it is still incomplete that, and the cell theory is completed by the Rodolph Virchow that he has said that all cells are produced from the division of pre-existing cells. That means the cell comes from the pre-existing cell. He named them as, in Latin it is called as omnis cellula e cellula. That means cell come from pre-existing cell. Always the cell come from pre-existing cell by the division of the pre-existing cell. A quick recap of the what we have studied now. Cell. Cell is the fundamental structural and functional unit of all living beings. All living things are made up of one or more cells. Every cell has its own life. Every single cell has its own life because it contains genetic material, either it is a DNA or it is an RNA. DNA is a deoxyribose nucleic acid, RNA is a ribose nucleic acid as a genetic material in every living organism. All living organisms, including ourselves, starts the life from single cell, that is zygote. Cells are so small that they cannot be seen with the naked eye. We have to use a microscope to visualize the cell. Before the discovery of the cell, Robert Hooke, a scientist, English scientist, discovered a compound microscope that has two lenses to observe the so small tiny particles, and he observed the oak oak tree branches, bark of the oak tree, and he observed small room like structures in the bark slices, and they named them as cells because in Latin it is called as a cells. And living cell was discovered by Antony von Leeuwenhoek. He observed the live cells which are moving in the scrape of the mouth, and he observed living cells, that is Antony von Leeuwenhoek observed the living cell. Cell theory. After the discovery of the cell, three scientists, that they are Sheldon, Scaven and Virchow, proposed the complete cell theory. And in this cell theory, there are mainly 3 points. Those are all organisms are composed of one or more cells. Every living organisms are made up of one, that is unicellular, two or more, that is multicellular organisms. The cell is the basic unit of life in all living things, that is Sheldon and Scaven. All cells are produced from the division of pre-existing cells. that is omnicellular e cellular. This statement was given by Virchow. Every cell is produced from the pre-existing cell.